Okay. Good evening to everyone. I'm Nikos Vettas on behalf of IOBE, that we are collaborating with Hellenic Production, Ελληνική Παραγωγή, for the discussion we're having today. I would like to welcome everyone. I'm gonna skip all sorts of introductions. Our topic today doesn't need one. We want to talk about the new type of industrial policy and the new economy, how this is viewed by Brussels, the European Union policies, and then the national policies. We're going to have a discussion that is going to follow the main presentation by Ms. Giulia del Brenna, that is going to tell us interesting things about the Brussels viewpoint. But before that, we are happy to have with us Minister Adonis Georgiadis, who is going to set the stage about how the Greek government and his ministry view the so-called new industrial policy, the role of the manufacturing sector, and all that. Minister, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us in this discussion.
Mr. Vettas, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor for me participating to a meeting with IOBE and you personally. Sorry for the small delay. I was in the parliament. I just finished a legislation about the simplification of economic activity in Greece under following Greece, the program and the obligation of the program, but because we also believe that we must give our best effort to make business life easier, as simple as we can. So you have a very interesting topic, and I think a topic that is it's coming in the right time, about the industry in Greece and how this production of industry can be increased. I say it's the right time. First, because we have a government in Greece that is very business friendly, and we want to change, we want to reverse the way Greece economy was going in the recent decades. I just say for historical reasons that Greece entered the 80s as a significant industrial power and exited the 80s and the 90s as almost no industry at all, and fixing an economy of tourism and only services economy. Our government, since day one, I mean, before the pandemic, wanted to reverse this model and wanted to give motivation and find ways to increase industry in the country. But as we were starting scheduling this, and you know that we fixed the Pissarides committee, in which you are very much involved, Nick, and we tried to see where was the advantages and the disadvantages our economy had in this field. Then the pandemic came. The pandemic, I think, helped in this vision, and I will explain you why. First of all, we had to fix simple and fast solution in order to increase our industrial productivity in areas of things we need for the pandemic, as antiseptic, gloves, masks, and everything, because we couldn't find anywhere else. Suddenly, import was not a solution, and we managed to find ways to work very fast. I will give an example. In the industries of the production of antiseptic, we had, before the pandemic, 240,000 per day total production in Greece, and in less of 1 month, we went 1.5 million per day, covering the 100% of our needs that suddenly came from the pandemic. The second good thing the pandemic did was that I think motivated and made European Union realize that having all our production lines, I mean as Europeans, outside of Europe, in other places of Asia or other places of the world, was not a good idea for any case. And suddenly into the European level, we are start discussing now how we can motivate our industry and how we can motivate our production in the European Union level. So we have a government that wants to do it, a European level, that a European Union that want to motivate it, and a Greek people that is very, very mature now and understand that all the habits we had in the last decades at the end were very bad for Greek economy, for the Greek people. Of course, there are disadvantages also, because I see Mr. Stassinopoulos there, and I'm sure he will raise the issue of the cost of energy in Greece. That is still is a disadvantage, and we are working to find solutions to that. But overall, we are a government that have sent clear signals that we're here to help industry. And I have to say that I'm very happy as Minister of Development that for many now quarters, the productive of industry is always rising, which proves that we have potential to go much, much better in the future. So thank you for this invitation. I will be very, very happy to hear the discussion.
Thank you, Minister, for these introductory remarks. The issue for how manufacturing can grow in Europe is not trivial. Just because we want it doesn't mean that we can succeed. We need to see where comparative advantages exist and where comparative advantages have to be created. Let me turn directly to Chris Allen, who is the resident advisor for the European Commission in Athens. Chris knows the Greek economy, but he understands also the European context as few. He's going to make a few remarks and then introduce our main speaker for the event.
As Minister Georgiadis said, and as Nikos mentioned, I think manufacturing and industry is a key question for Greece. It's an area where Greece can be very, very strong and has been in the past and should be in the future. But I'm delighted that today we have Giulia Brenna with us. Giulia is from the European Commission for the DG for the Single Market and Growth. CV, I think, is excellently suited to Greece. She's worked on pharmaceuticals, food, healthcare, and was part of the task force for Greece in the past. She was Deputy Head of Cabinet for the Research Commissioner, Carlos Modest, and now is the Deputy Director for Strategy and Regulation in DG Grow and Head of Industrial Policy. So I'm very glad that she was able to come and talk to us about industrial policy. Thank you. So over to Giulia.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris, for this introduction. I'm extremely happy to be here, as you said, also because I have a path link to Greece. I'm also happy to have been able to make my contribution to the management of this crisis. Thank you, Professor, for inviting me to this event. And thank you very much, Minister, for setting the framework. And with modesty, I will say that the fact that we have this past in health management, also in a time of a very different crisis, I think it's very helpful now in this context to draw the lessons of what is happening and also to see the importance of industry and manufacturing, not only for Greece, but in general, to be able to have a resilient economy ready to resist to crisis, whatever they are now and they will be in the future, because unfortunately this is not a one-off, and the update of the industrial strategy tries exactly to respond to this. How can we be better prepared in the future so that the management of this crisis is, as you said far better than me, an opportunity for the future and not only a crisis of today. I hope you are able to see my slides, and I will do a presentation of what we meant by that. And obviously, sorry, yes, I can. This first slide we use quite often because it shows, and I hope you don't see a black square exactly where Greece should be. I hope you can see Greece. What happened last spring. And what happened last spring is that for obvious and very important reasons, border movement was restricted all over Europe, and this had serious consequences. This had serious consequences, and I would say in particular for areas that are at the geographical periphery of the European Union, like Greece, because it's not only closing or restricting the border, but is suffering the cascade of effects of all the other borders being restricted in the rest of Europe. As I said, that was needed, but it was done in a situation we all lived also personally of urgency, without particular coordination, transparency, and often times proportion. And soon enough, the authorities saw that the effect of the situation had to be addressed not only from a public health point of view, but also from a single market and industrial policy point of view. And towards the end of 2020, the Council and the European Council asked the Commission to update its industrial strategy. The industrial strategy had been adopted just on the eve of the day in March 2020 when the WHO declared a general pandemic. Its principles did not change, but it was quite obvious that it had to be adapted to what we learned from the crisis, in particular about the need to strengthen the single market resilience, the need to analyze and address strategic dependencies, and that was mentioned in very concrete words by Minister Georgiadis, and also the need to accelerate the twin green and digital transitions. Our industrial strategy uses as basis for analysis what we call the ecosystems. So the ecosystems are not the usual sectors that Eurostat use for its indicators, but try to group in areas of activities of goods and services 70% of the European Union activity. And we worked on recent indicators because the crisis, you really needed something that was not months old. On these indicators, you see in this graph that is not particularly readable because it's all about these 14 ecosystems and it stops in April, but I should change because we have May 21, how the confidence indicator changes following the ecosystems. And obviously you can recognize spring 2020, you can recognize the summer of 2020 when we had a bit, all of us also personally, we had a bit of breathing space, and then the fall where we had the second wave. And you can see that the confidence, which is perhaps not a perfect indicator, but a good predictor of what happens in the different ecosystems, how it is not the same in tourism, obviously, but in digital, because we saw it in our lives and our activities, and obviously for Greece, it was quite striking, and the minister said it, this reliance on the sector of tourism must have been felt far more than in other areas. So obviously for digital things were difficult, like for everybody, but everybody went digital, and there is now a sort of optimism that you can find obviously in health, but far less in textile and tourism. So what about single market resilience? As my first slide shown, we had a lot of difficulties. Coordination was soon began, went better, and free movement could be restored in quite a good measure. But again, in the fall, we had not the same picture, but a similar picture. In this slide, again, not sure everybody can read the graph, shows how the GDP suffered from the crisis, as it was to be expected, and that's the blue lines, but the intra-EU trade suffered more than the GDP, which shows two things. One bad is that free movement was not insured anymore, and for some countries, and there you see Greece, which is the lowest red dot, because Greece, as I said, because of the position, suffered from its own restrictions, but also from the restrictions of all the other member states. But it's striking the difference. So the good news is that we can also see a certain resilience of the economy that could deal with economic activity in other ways. So what happened, as I said, is restrictions, lack of coordination and information, which meant that as citizens or economic operators, we would at a certain point go to the border because we did not know. In my case, if I could drive to Italy, or in the case of an SME, if it could or not make a delivery. And this could have been mitigated by simply transparency. If I knew I could not go to the border, I would not go to the border and stay at home and do teleworking. And a company could have decided to make the delivery in another way, or not to make a delivery, or to postpone the delivery, or to sell to other economic operators. We saw a lot of disruption in the supply chains, which were the consequence of these situations, and high volume of non-compliant goods to be checked. And the combination of all these things often was contrary to the objective of the public health. Last spring, I was working in the commission with medical devices and personal protection equipment, and we saw in a number of occasions masks, which were already difficult to come by, being imported, arriving in one member state and not able to go to the member states who had imported the goods and badly needed them. Same things could happen with ventilators. And when this badly needed equipment were needed, and were contracted, they could not be checked, and there were unfortunately a lot of issues of non-compliance with imported masks and others. The solution that we for times of crisis that we propose in the communication is what we call the single market emergency instrument. And the idea is really to build on what we did right in this full year, to provide a structural solution to ensure the free movement of persons, goods and services in case of any pan-European crisis, and obviously proportional to what can be done. Imagine you have floods like in 2002 in the east of Europe. Some highways will be underwater, but we have to make sure that there is not a ripple effect to Ireland because highways are underwater in the east of Europe, for example. We have to make sure that critical goods and services can arrive where they are more needed. And we have to make sure that non-essential movement that would help in solving the crisis is restricted in a coordinated way, so that I don't go to the border because I want to drive to Italy if this is not essential. Obviously, we made a little internal non-scientific assessment of pan-European crisis affecting the internal market in the last 20 years, and we came up with 6, which is much more than the COVID crisis, but 6 is still not all the time, and we hope the trend will not accelerate. So what about the rest of the time? A couple of member states in council meetings said to me, look, if the single market was really working, we would not need a single market emergency instrument. I have arguments to say no, still in extreme situations, we would need such an instrument, but still they are right in a way that the single market has to be deepened for everyday business and not only for crisis. The COVID-19 crisis has just shown things that were not working well already before, and the most striking example is services. And we propose some measures for faster and easier cross-border service provision. For goods, we propose measures for better circulation of safe, compliant goods. The issue of compliance was striking, as I said, for personal protection equipment, but the lack of resources of a number of national authorities and notified bodies is something that precedes the crisis. Also, the crisis made quite clear that those who suffered most, the economic actors that suffered most from the disorganization on the single market were SMEs. And that was a stark reminder that SMEs need particular help also in non-crisis times, in particular for capital and equity financing. I did not forget the third pillar, which is analysis, but because it leads me to the second part of the presentation, the crisis made so much clear that we need to know more about what's happening in the single market. When I was working with medical devices and personal protection equipment, we all agreed that we lacked a number of things, gloves and overalls, and the masks, obviously, disinfectant, also ventilators, etc. And we were in touch always with the industry, as you've been in Greece, and the minister explained how Greece could very fast put up production lines for badly needed products. But the industry at European level kept asking, but how much do you need? What is the demand? And we could not come up with an answer. I say we collectively, because it's not governments that know how many masks are needed by nurses. These are hospital structures, and hospital structures were totally overwhelmed by the crisis last spring. And they did not know on top a European authority saying, how many masks do you need? But if you don't know how many masks do you need, it's very difficult to organize a production. And that is why we need to have better information system and knowledge of the different critical ecosystems, so that when a new crisis arises, we can come with models and forecasts that helps both citizens on one side to have what they need, but also companies to deliver. The second lesson is the need to analyze and address strategic dependency and capacities. Again, I come back with my example. When I dealt with personal protection equipment, we did not really know where medical gloves were produced. Turns out that medical gloves are produced in a couple of plants in Southeast Asia, which is kind of normal because this is not really a very high added value product and it's very labor intensive. But we did not know it was a couple of them. We did not know, and obviously some people knew. I'm talking about the people that were doing that. And not only it was a few, the labor conditions were appalling. And at a certain point, there was a big COVID cluster in one of these. And immediately, a market what was already tense began to be impossible to manage. And that was a time where we did not really know how contagion happened. And there was this exaggerated fear of it happening by contact. So there was really a request even from normal citizens to have medical gloves. But imagine now that we are all in quite a successful way vaccinating the whole population of our countries. You can have all the vaccines if you want, but if you cannot have nurses with medical gloves, you cannot vaccinate people. And that's why over-reliance on third countries and on few third countries for a product which is in normal times prosaic can have problems. I'm talking of gloves today, but it's important, again, to know what's happening, to know what can be critical. So currently, I'm working also with industrial scaling up of vaccines. And our main worry are to, not so prosaic, because in fact it's high value added inputs that are custom made. But when you say them, it's filters and plastic bags, bioreactor plastic bags. It looks like something very easy. Well, it's not, because it's for medical use and it's customized. But because these companies are now scaling up in a way nobody ever did, and they have no inventories, and scarcity is affecting also suppliers, one filter can put on hold the national vaccination campaign. And so it's a very fancy filter, but it's still a filter. And it took us quite a while to get to the required knowledge of the supply chain and to the required contacts with the industry to get to a point where we minimize collectively, and say we, the authorities, but also the companies, etc., we minimize the risks of disruption. And I'm saying minimizing because, again, the supply chain is really tense, no inventory, no margin for any mistake. And this is my personal example because I'm in the middle of it about being caught by surprise and unprepared, and the need for companies, but also for authorities to make sure that supply is diversified. We have ways of doing it. We did it for batteries, for example, but we need to first have the information, and that is reviewing these strategic dependencies, and then concentrating our efforts in these useful tools that can be alliances, but also IPCIs and international partnerships to prevent these situations arising. There are also a number of horizontal measures that can be helpful them there, like standards, public procurement guidance, and this new instrument we have on foreign subsidies. And there is no single recipe. So if I go back to vaccines, because it is what I know best, and it's also in the air now, on production of the COVID-19 vaccines that we use in the European Union now, it's not only, but mostly a transatlantic affair. The technology, the way of producing, bags and filters are a very fast way of using bioreactors, but in China they do it the old way, which they just wash the bioreactors, so they don't need the bags. And most of these things are produced in Europe or in the States. Leaders of suppliers are European, but some of these items are produced in the United States. And in the crisis, the United States used the Defense Production Act. And all of a sudden, we couldn't get the filter. We couldn't get the bag, which was produced by a European company. And it took a while to put in place a dialogue with the United States on these issues. Why? Because of lack of information, because a lack of a proper protocol of what to do when there is a crisis affecting the pharmaceutical supply chain. So my colleagues in the chief economist team they did a model on this, and they came up for a limited number of critical ecosystems with a screening and a list of 137 products in sensitive ecosystems, representing 6% of the import value of goods in the EU. And I like this slide because it's very colorful. They just put in this rectangle the origin of these dependencies. And as you see, 52% is China, which is something that we would expect. But for the rest, there are some surprising things. The United States, not so much. And they can also play the model in different ways. And for example, there is a limited but quite worrying list of products where both us and the United States are dependent. So we cannot even play the transatlantic friendship, even though, as we saw for filters and bags, it's not always the magic sesame. So what we use this analysis and crossed it with the tools, as I said, that have proved to work, to see a little bit, to map those sectors and parts of the economy where we have strengths in the European Union and those where we have weaknesses and dependencies. And obviously, this is instrumental to show that alliances do work, but it is true that alliances do work. So because by joining forces at all levels to push for European production, you can get there. And not only you can produce, but you can also create markets. And it is what we are doing with hydrogen. We were and we are and we will hopefully continue to be leaders in advanced manufacturing, but we have a number of issues with semiconductors and cloud, and there we have announced alliances. The semiconductor one is an extremely good example because not only there is this dependency, but also there is this concentration, and it's not global, the semiconductor in a couple of factories, and there we see that an event like there was a heat wave in Taiwan. So there was a heat wave in Taiwan, and then there were blackouts because everybody was putting on the air conditioning, and that affected the production of semiconductors. If you add to that the fact that the Americans are at home and are not going to the restaurant, and so they are buying gadgets, and then the effect is that our car factories cannot produce cars because they lack the semiconductors that you have to put in the cars. So this strategic dependency has to be seen like a risk for us, but it is also a global risk. So I read in the FT this interview of someone in the car industry saying, if the Americans could go back to using services, we would have less of a problem in car plants in Germany. Then when I was talking about this article with a colleague, and because I tend to be a bit Italian, I translated in, if Americans began going to the restaurant, but I guess they meant the same thing, we would have less of a problem with our car production. But that's a bit the image that stayed in my mind, even though it was not written. But this shows how knowing what's happening, having the information and the ability to work on it is important for us. The third lesson is about accelerating the green and digital transitions, and I will go fast because I think I'm talking a bit too much now. For the digital, it's quite obvious. It's obvious, again, at personal level. We went all digital, and that allows me to be now talking to you. It is at, let's say, a conceptual level, quite obvious also for the green transition, where we all agree on. But we have to go ecosystem by ecosystem and look at the cost and the difficulty of actually doing it, and working on this transition together with the stakeholders. The model we advocate is a model, it's an holistic model in looking at all the needs of companies to get there, and obviously regulatory, and the Commission will come up very soon with a fit for 55 packages, difficult for me to pronounce, but we have also to address access to capacities and infrastructure, finance, obviously, but also access to raw materials, decarbonized energy, because a lot of industry can reach the goals only if they have access to green energy, and also to the right people. I don't know, it's probably blackened, but the last item is the issue of having access to the right skills. Again, and I'm happy to finish with that, it's important to put SMEs at the core of the green and digital transition, and the communication asks for really mobilizing all the networks we have to help SMEs in this endeavor. So before I close, I'm not reading because it's so dense, this slide, which is about the case of steel. Steel as an example, also because with the package on the update, there was a staff working document on steel, which was very well received by the industry, which is not an easy industry, but colleagues put a lot of effort to show a bit how this model can work for steel, which is at the same time a very traditional sector that, as a woman of the street, I think, okay, this is an old sector that is not so good, but it is also a sector where Europe is extremely strong for new steels, very high added value steels and green steel. And the slide shows the model we want to put in place. First of all, information analysis of knowing the whole issues on the inputs, on the demand side, and the needs related to investment, but also to actions at international level and on collaborative policy making. Is important that every ecosystem has access to the right tools of working together, adapted to the needs of the transitions and the ecosystems. And I will stop here. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Giulia. I suppose we can go directly to Chris, who can connect with policy priorities for Greece from his own viewpoint, and then turn to Mr. Michalis Stassinopoulos to get the industry view.
Okay, thank you, Nico. I shall be relatively brief because I think Giulia has given a very wide-ranging description of EU policy. I guess there are three bottom lines in what she's saying. One is we need to improve the resilience of our economies. And as we found out last year, particularly in March and April, even the single market, even trade can't be taken for granted. And that was trade within the EU, but also trade without the EU. And it's clearly very important to improve the resilience of our economies. And I think that this provides, to me anyway, a very big opportunity for Greek industry, particularly in areas that perhaps have not been fully understood yet. I mean, I'll just take two pretty obvious examples. I mean, the first one is look, there's opportunities for even on the agriculture and food and to supply from within the EU. I think it was notable that actually Greek, as well as health and pharmaceutical products, Greek exports on food and fishes went up last year. So there is the importance of the internal market is still there and is becoming bigger. And I would say also, and I think some Greek industries, particularly the non-ferrous metals industry, have perhaps exploited this already, which is the fact that the application of science gives the edge to such industries that can compete from outside. With producers outside the EU. And what is more, we need to take more account of the fact that these industries, we need to have a role within the EU. Now, I mean, and what I want to say, I just want to focus a bit more on the green and the digital part. I think the green and digital transition is absolutely essential for Greece, and this is obviously a very big part of the recovery fund. It seems to me that on the green side, Greece has always benefited from its environment, both in terms of products, but also in terms of tourism, potentially also in terms of being an excellent place for cheap renewables. And the need and the focus on the green transition is particularly important. Particularly the transition from lignite to renewables, increasing energy efficiency, and the new opportunities that arise from the use of electric vehicles, for instance, where indeed a whole new supply chain is being developed. On the digital side, I think Greece also has a very big future. On one side, from the supply side, where I think Greece has a very strong set of IT human capital, which links very closely with the sort of engineering and the medical and pharmaceutical strength of Greece. And I think this is an area where Greece can do very, very well. And then on the other side, paradoxically, because after Greece has sort of lost the last 10 years, really, in terms of the internet revolution, I think, as we've seen actually since last March, there's a very big opportunity for Greece to leapfrog, as we've seen with gov.gr, in terms of moving quickly to the best provision of government services in the EU. And I think that these things have been made possible, I guess, paradoxically, by the coronavirus crisis. So I think that Greece has a lot to gain from participating more closely with European discussions on industrial policy. And I think that the recovery plan will indeed enable that. And it seems to me that the 30 billion of resources made available, of which basically 13 billion will actually be in terms of loans, gives a very big opportunity for both loans and risk capital for a turnaround in the financing of Greek industry. And I hope that we will see Greek industry able to benefit from that. Let me leave it there and pass over to the industrialists. Thank you.
Chris, I was thinking before we go to Mr. Stassinopoulos that is going to bring us a little bit close to what the people call the real reality, the real world. I will still think, let me put on the table a couple of thoughts or question marks, both for you and also for Giulia, if you don't mind. So from the European viewpoint, can we say something about how the allocation of this new manufacturing activity may be done across member states? And I'm asking this because if in the end of the day, and of course, Giulia, I'm using this as an example, the north of Italy has more manufacturing than the south of Italy. That's not the end of the world, because there are equalizing and transfer mechanisms. But if we end up having more manufacturing in Europe, yes, we want this. But if that's end up being more concentrated in 3 or 4 or 5 member states, that might not be a good outcome for the other and overall. So the reason I'm bringing this up might be unequal terms of access to finance, and might be also different national policies. That's one question. And a dual question, which might be a little bit closer to the viewpoint of Greece. Unemployment is not a big issue for Europe overall. I would say productivity might be more so. But for Greece, unemployment is an issue. And if this new manufacturing comes with jobs that are very much capital intensive, but not labor intensive, does this create a conflict? Or does it create a conflict with the fact that in Greece we have many more SMEs? I'm not taking a stand on this, I'm just asking. So let's hear from Mr. Michalis Stassinopoulos first, if he's ready. And then perhaps we can discuss some of these other issues in our discussion.
Yes, good evening, good afternoon, good evening to all participants. And on behalf of Hellenic Production, I would like to express my gratitude to you, Nikos, first, and IOBE for co-organizing with us this enlightening and hopefully useful discussion on industrial policy and the new economy. I would also like to warmly thank our distinguished guest with his wonderful analysis, Mr. Chris Allen, Minister Georgiadis for his opening remarks, and certainly Mrs. Giulia Brenna for her kind participation and the excellent, and I would say for me, inspiring presentation for the updated EU industrial policy. This updated strategy, of course, was endorsed by the Commission and presented on the 5th of May and offers a great opportunity for reflection for not only at the EU level, but also, very important, at the national level here in Greece today. This update was deemed necessary in order to bring on board the lessons from the COVID-19 crisis to strengthen the EU's economic resilience and to accelerate the twin digital and green transition. Although we are all delighted with the promising signs of a stronger than expected economic recovery, it remains an undeniable fact that Greece has been severely affected by the coronavirus pandemic due to the structure of its economy. The large share of tourism, services and transport made us particularly vulnerable to the shocks triggered by travel restrictions and social distancing measures. So the lesson to be learned by the impact of the coronavirus crisis, the first lesson, is to some extent similar to the lesson of the previous 10 years severe economic crisis. Greece has to move towards a more balanced, productive, inclusive and export-oriented economic model. And this goes hand in hand with more skills and innovation in the economy, in the country and the economy. The contribution of the manufacturing industry to such an economic model is self-evident and widely acknowledged, especially during the last decade by all major EU institutions and other economies around the world. In Greece, this is a point raised by IOBE on several occasions, notably from its central role in the experts committee chaired by Professor Pissaridis, which produced a few months ago the latest development plan for the Greek economy. The Recovery and Resilience Plan of Greece, approved last week by the European Commission, declares in its executive summary its consistency with the Pissaridis Committee plan recommendations and underlines that it inspires to facilitate a paradigm shift in the Greek economy towards a more exports-oriented, competitive and more green economy. But the question and the real challenge for us is how we turn words into deeds. More concretely, how fast we are moving towards this paradigm shift, taking into consideration that our starting point is weaker in terms of share of manufacturing in the Greek GDP, in terms of the country's export performance, and in relation with the investment gap Greece has been and is still experiencing for several years now, I would say a decade. So one positive and promising aspect is the fact that the manufacturing industry in Greece, despite difficulties, fueled by successive crises and chronic deficiencies in the business environment, has proven its resilience and had major contribution to the recovery path. But still there is a long way to go in order to bridge the gaps with our European partners and competitors who are moving fast to meet the challenges of the new economy, namely the twin green and digital transition. Taking into consideration all this, namely the broader environment and how it rapidly evolves, the world is going to be very different until the end of the decade, very different. And the challenges we are faced with and chronic deficiencies that we still have to overcome, I must say that we would expect as an industrial sector, and we still do expect, stronger incentives in the Greek recovery and resilience plan in relation with the industry's green and digital transition. The loan facilities merely bridge the gap between debt rates in Greece and the rest of Europe and are not enough for the huge investment needs, not only for the decarbonization of industry, but also for the overall transition to circular production and consumption. When we are talking green industry and green economy, we have to understand that green doesn't apply only to energy, but it applies to every aspect of production. So adaptation and incentives for this adaptation need to cover everything and not only the transition of the energy sector. The recovery and resilience policies of most European countries clearly show that this is being acknowledged much more than in Greece. And more practical reasons for our worry about this lack of incentives are the possible, about the lack of the range of incentives, are the possible near future complications, distortions, and even possible penalties to companies in relation to taxonomy legislation and the access of Greek companies to financial and capital markets. We expect these very negative prospects to be timely addressed. Taking advantage of the honor and the opportunity of having with us distinguished speakers, distinguished speakers from the European Commission, Chris and Giulia, I would like to draw your attention to this regard, as we are talking today on the updated industrial strategy with a special focus on strengthening the single market and the green and digital transition. You have, and we all have, to make sure that the necessary tools are in place to secure that the industrial sector in all EU countries and regions has equal opportunities, or relatively equal opportunities, to join in. We should consider the twin transition and the EU's ambition to lead the way towards climate neutrality as a great opportunity for a more united, economically and socially coherent EU, and thus to avoid new division and gaps that could, unfortunately, quite easily emerge. The gaps. Ladies and gentlemen, we often hear and use the expression "time is money." I would like to propose that this is not the case anymore. In our era, where not only technology, not only the economy, but every single aspect of our everyday life is changing so rapidly, time is much more than money. The ability to follow, to adapt, and to move fast forward is a precondition for earning a place in the future. And that's why we are worried. It is effectively the passport for not being left behind. And this calls for a major shift in our way of thinking and acting. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Stassinopoulos. I believe you gave a balanced overview for where... A bit general.
Yes, we could speak a lot about all these things, but yes.
We have some time now, a little bit more than 20 minutes until 7:30 when we will have to wrap up. Chris, I don't know exactly how you want to do this. Perhaps can we start with these two concerns that I put on the table? Giulia correctly spoke about more like ecosystems rather than sectors. How does this cross national borders? And how does EU policy interact with national policies? That's one question. And it is also a question for people like Michalis Stassinopoulos, in the sense of, can we have in so-called periphery countries industry that belongs in some sense to the core, in other words, champions, that would still be in Greece rather than just schematically in Germany. I don't know, or Giulia or Chris, you want to jump on this?
If I may, and also to link with your initial questions, but were the same and different of the start. It is not for us, and obviously it's not in the treaty, and I don't think any member state would like to, for the European Union or Commission to say where something should be manufactured. But I can share some ideas that come from the strategy, but also from what I saw happening with the vaccines. As the minister said very well at the beginning, this crisis can be and is an opportunity at all levels to jump on opportunities and to understand that opportunities have to be used and fast, because you were really right in saying that time is more than money. We have now an opportunity, which is also money, because there is, and as you said, it doesn't cover the gap, the Reform and Recovery Fund, but it, first of all, it's a new instrument and it's a new way of working, and it is a much needed and oriented injection of liquidity. Never ever there was in Europe so much liquidity. And one of the things we see with our indicators, well, you all know that, it's no company is failing anymore. You have a number of zombies there because a number of companies should have failed anyway, and they didn't because of a number of measures that were taken. So it is now for individuals, authorities, governments, Europe, to use the recovery just to keep alive those that should be alive if the crisis had not happened, to boost those that use the opportunity of the crisis, and also to let die those who should have died anyway. What I saw with vaccines is that there was a big reset. Europe before COVID was producing 76% of not the world vaccines, but let's say the globally used vaccines, because you have vaccines that are used only in certain areas, so these don't count. But let's say that Europe was a big leader. Europe is still a leader, but China has produced half of the COVID-19 vaccines. We don't think about it because they are not approved. We don't use them. We know their efficacy is lower. It's not low, because we would have been very happy to have efficacy of 50%, but now we have the mRNA vaccines at around 85, 90. So obviously we look at quality in a way. But there was a big reset. And a big reset that is not always a quality reset. We still maintain this huge capacity to produce and to export, because apart from China, only Europe from day one exported vaccines. And how was it made possible? Because we expanded our capacity. So you have an issue of, obviously, we had the capacity to produce vaccines in the 3-4 countries that used to produce vaccines anyway. Yes. And these are not the periphery. These are the industrial core of Europe, France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, okay? And some a bit, not the UK, in spite of what they say, and they are there. But what we saw is that to come to now a level where we could reach 3 billion doses a year, and because there was this situation already talked about in the States, this regulatory blockage, there was an incredible expansion at all levels: vaccine, finished, vaccine, substance, inputs, filters, whatever my usual pets in Europe. And this did not happen only in the usual places. a lot in the usual places, but we saw incredible expansions in places you would not have thought about: Baltic countries, Eastern Balkans, Czech Republic, etc. Because in a way you have still the old globalized model. I go where it works fine for the airplanes, where I have skilled and not so expensive workforce. So there is this globalization mind, but at the same time, we saw a rush toward localizing. I ask companies, why are you expanding here? And the same company works, I don't know, in Italy, and why are you doing it here in Czech Republic? Because it's nearer. So there is a localization. There is a realization that the global supply chain model of just in time is not working anymore. Vaccines is still just in time, but we would like so much for it not to be just in time. And we expect that certain things will go back to the old ways, certain things will not. Just in time is not working, because apart from COVID, there was Suez, there is, and obviously I'm not saying that to a Greek audience because you know that better than I do, there is a shipping chaos out there. I find it fascinating how, delays in deliveries, it's just there are no containers to be found in the world. The price of shipping has quadrupled during the crisis. It's an effect of the crisis, but now it has become a self-sustaining consequence of the chaos. And I love the word, the maritime jams. So in a way, experts say it will be solved in 2024. And a lot of economic actors have to change the way of doing. Can we rely so much on shipping? You used to use shipping for cheap products, but now cheap products are becoming so expensive because of shipping. So there is a trend going all over the world, but also Europe, about reconsidering inventories, which means reconsidering warehouses, which means reconsidering logistics. And these are opportunities, in particular for peripheral countries, because the periphery of Europe becomes our front line. So I would not, anyway, me, myself, I have to be modest, would not know where what should be produced. But yes, there will be opportunities, and there are opportunities that go beyond the green and digital, and that are linked to what's happening, but also are linked to what economic operators are seeing. In vaccines, the transatlantic model I spoke about, now, big companies, you don't have European pharma companies or American pharma companies, they have a name, but they are whatever, global. They are thinking they should be able to be global, but to be able to separate the two parts if need be. And obviously this is an extreme example, but there is this thing of going local and saying to me, even in the European Union, I'd rather have a supply that is not so far away. And we have models that show that companies for vaccines always concentrating production in a few plants were more successful in upscaling than companies disseminating production in several plants, which is a bit counterintuitive, but because personnel, skilled and non-skilled, is very important. When you do an operation like that without inventory, even the person in the warehouse must make no mistakes. And this is why also what you said at the beginning, the issue of unemployment and availability of human resources and which kind, the crisis has shown that yes, you need these incredible technicians that can avoid contamination in the warehouse. Otherwise, you just throw out 60 million vaccines like Johnson did. But you also need a person in the warehouse that can ensure vaccines get to you and me. And these people have to be trained, and you have to avoid turnover. I ask companies, how do you do? Because you do such big expansion. Basically, they take persons from other vaccines, put them there and train where there is less risk. Because it's not only about scarcity, it's about having persons that stay in the job. So during the crisis, it's not so difficult. People are very proud to be working there. But what do you do then? And I stop here because I can talk hours about that, and I don't know if I address your questions correctly. So Chris, please complete and correct.
Okay, thanks, Giulia. I must say I have a similar reaction to you, although perhaps phrased in more economic terms. I mean, I think honestly, the moment for economies of scale and scope has come and is partly passing as a result of the ending of the just-in-time model. I mean, clearly, new business models are emerging, and they could be of smaller production and different sorts of production. Clearly, in the IT field, I mean, we now talk about digital nomads. Very much, as we see even in this conference, it's very easy now for international collaboration. So there's a different approach. I would say. One thing that is very important, though, I think that the recovery plan is a game changer here. I think it's for the first time there is the allocation of very substantial amounts of resources, more to some of the southern countries, particularly Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal. And secondly, I think this is also important. It starts to tackle the divide in the capital market. I mean, given the leverage, the sort of 13 billion worth of loans will at least produce, I guess, something like 20, 30 billion worth of additional loans, which is of the order of 15% of GDP. It's a very substantial difference, and those loans will be at a much lower interest margin than before. And what is more, the liquidity then flows into Greece. So this will be a game changer and will be very important, I think, in turning things around. Does that mean that Greece is no longer responsible for things? No, that's certainly not the case. And clearly, it's very important for that Greece indeed does focus on improving people's skills, particularly digital skills. I think that there's a very big awareness of that need. If you look at the diminishing queues, I guess, outside banks that there were initially. The people are adopting digitization, but the very big proportion of the recovery plan is particularly focused on improving skills. And I think that again, this is a start, but it's a very significant input into changing people's perceptions about digitization in Greece. Never mind their skill levels, and I think that needs to be taken into account. So. Am I optimistic? Actually, yes, I am, and I think we have, and we will see a big change round in Greece and the dynamic of growth in Greece over the next few years, and that's, I guess, why the government and also the Commission are expecting a very much faster growth rate in the country over the next 4 to 5 years. And this certainly will be a game changer.
Chris, I guess we all have to be optimistic. I still feel a little bit the need to put a little bit my thoughts in some order with respect as we are moving towards the end of the discussion. We're not done yet, but I guess a significant part of the story that Giulia told us today is that production, for various reasons, needs to come closer to home, but that is going to rely on a number of conditions. And then even if you bring it within the EU, there is going to be some core activities, but there is going to be also distribution that for many reasons, proximity to demand, access to specialized and other trained personnel, can actually happen to, I guess what you call more like frontier countries or countries that would replace what was outside the EU before in some sense. Now, having said that, my only question is, because this is not the first time we're talking about the last several decades about jump-starting the European economy, okay? We have seen this before. Yes, this time may be different, but there are those who say that if you look at the response of the American economy and the Asian economies after the pandemic, they are coming out more dynamic than us. And I'm hearing what Chris said. It's very important that now access to finance is maybe no longer an issue as it was before. And use of training programs so that people can actually get high-value jobs. But in some sense, unless in key industries we get closer to the frontier of research and innovation, it's not just a matter of what you're going to consume within the EU, it's a matter of what you're going to sell to the rest of the world. And that perhaps we haven't discussed as much, although it might be, given the time, a topic for our next discussion. But it is it is if you go through the list of what are the top companies in the world, very few of them happen to be on European soil. And if you look at our productivity and employment records, we should do better. So I'm an optimist. I believe we are in front of a new start, but we have been in new starts before. I don't know if Mr. Stassinopoulos has a final view in terms of if European policies now through the RRF and national policies, they are aligned enough, or is the ball now for the industrial sector to do the job, or policy has to actually, if policy still needs to do things.
If I just can intervene, because I'm really, really sorry, but I have to switch meetings that I've passed, and yes. It's a pity because I wanted to hear Mr. Stassinopoulos your reaction, but I will then ask Chris.
No problem.
We will play you the video later.
Yes, so thanks a lot for having me here. Thanks also because for me it's very important for food for thought. The last message I want to leave is that one thing we learned in Europe is just welcome the unexpected. Because when you said the Asian economies reacted better, I think we reacted in a way that was totally unexpected. Obviously, I know the vaccines. And we it was a fit, and not only because we had experience. And the Indians, for example, were the big disappointment for vaccines, the big disappointment. We should have vaccinated the world. Turns out it was with low efficacy, the Chinese, and the Europeans with extremely high efficacy, which doesn't mean we can replicate in every sector, but I think it's important. You are right with the list of big companies, but I looked at it recently. Yes, the biggest does bags. So do we really need this kind of expensive bags? It can be discussed. And with buying them, it can be discussed. But among the biggest, there are a couple of digital that are in the Netherlands. We don't even know about it. And there are also of a couple that are here for fiscal reasons. So let's think about the model we want, and we will never see Pfizer because it's listed as American. But Pfizer went up because of its activities in Europe. So you are totally right. We have to think it and with new lens. And Mr. Stassinopoulos, I beg Chris to tell me what you will answer to that. I'm sorry for that, and I was really honored to be part of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giulia.
Bye-bye. Have a good day and a good end of the seminar.
And Mr. Stassinopoulos, now you have almost the last word, although I guess Chris can stay for a few minutes and we can wrap up together. Your microphone is not on.
Yeah, I followed with great interest the analysis of our two distinguished guests, who are closer, of course, than us, than the businessmen, to the formation of the EU policy. And it's a very interesting analysis and hopeful and optimistic. What disturbed me a bit is the notion of the periphery and the implication that the periphery cannot be a really active and let's say play important roles in the growth and the manufacturing. Let's say, of course, the discussion was quite vaccine specific by Giulia. Okay, these are specific products, and it's certain that Greece could not easily play such a role. But I want to focus more on the qualitative aspects, and maybe as something that could be thought. Some people might see it as a paradox, but the companies that survived the two previous financial crises in Greece and and also helped so much during the last crisis and showed that manufacturing is resilient and is resilient everywhere it exists. It's an important contributor to growth and stability of an economy. I think that these companies effectively are small champions, smaller and larger champions, and they are active. They are exporting all around the world. If we take the smallest micro companies, and this is a phenomenon of the Greek, company environment, and I do not see it as a really important for growth. I agree that we should somehow tackle this phenomenon, but there are many companies which could put Greece in a much better position. Can promote they can promote inclusive growth. They can promote ecosystems. Some sectors are mentioned. Okay, my personal experiences with the metal sector, non-ferrous and ferrous. There is a lot of innovation. I don't see the need to, in terms of the RRF funds and how they are spent and how the countries are being assessed. I think that the qualitative aspects of even small companies, smaller clusters, and should be taken into consideration. Greece has, and the Balkans, I would say, have companies that certainly can be among the best in the world in their specific in the specific job, what they are, the products and what they are doing. And I think that this realization will help a lot. And I hope that all these funds are going to be targeted to production because it will increase the productivity of the economy, labor productivity. It will, in the case of Greece, it will help a lot by stabilizing the economy. But also, I would say personally, in the case of Europe, it will make a more stable Europe, even politically, I would say, if these funds are channeled to the real economy. This is my simplistic analysis from, thank you very much.
A quick view, and I guess we should be concluding the discussion, is that even if we leave aside all the individual benefits that the RRF can bring, just to continue Mr. Stassinopoulos' thought, there is one global benefit, which is that it kind of signals the unity of policy in Europe, and it takes away uncertainties that have been very deleterious for the Greek economy over the last 10 years. And in some sense, taking these uncertainties away, which is also recorded in the funding costs and in many other aspects, might be a significant part of the job. Because Greek business has shown large businesses, smaller businesses, that they can be resilient. And if the policy environment becomes stable enough, then they can do a lot more than today. So in that sense, the benefit of the RRF might not be in the details. Of course, the details are important, of course, and Chris is going to be upset if I don't stress this. The implementation is super important, and of course it's super important, but the big signal that it gives is perhaps equally important. And then how you wrap up the rest of economic policy, because the RRF is not just one thing, in terms of taxes and real estate and pensions and education, is going to be key for Greece to really grow fast. I don't know if you would agree or disagree, Chris.
No, I think it's very clear that the recovery plan is a one-off opportunity for Greece. I think it's a very significantly a breathing space for industry. For the next 5 years, then funding is going to be there for investment, and that's tremendously important to allow the investment to go ahead. But on the other side, and I guess this is where it's down to the responsibility of the different member states, which is there is now some financing available to undertake really important reforms, and I guess that this is also an important break from the past. That it's possible to do the funding to, for instance, make the transition, the energy transition, and I think that this is crucial, and of course it means that it's an opportunity. Nobody can be sure how it will, how successful ultimately it will be, but I do think, and I think this is very important, this is a decentralized expansion. And the member states and the governments have it in their own hands to make this a success. And I think that is very, very important. And I think it should be a reason for optimism on the whole that across Europe, member states on the whole are going to take this opportunity. And I think it is very clear that the Greek government understand that very, very well. So thanks. And just one word to Michael. I think I agree that the centre and periphery is not a good way of describing Europe. I mean, the vaccines market is a very specific one. What I would say, and actually Nikos and myself spent a remarkable amount of time looking at productivity in different size classes across the EU. And one thing is very clear is that actually the larger Greek firms are as productive or even more productive than the average EU firms in their size class. The problem is very much with the smaller firms, where productivity is very much lower than elsewhere in Europe. And I guess it's particularly with those. So it's not that large firms can't compete, and indeed large firms do very successfully compete in Greece. But the smaller firms clearly and largely, I guess, for funding reasons, have much more difficulty competing. So I think that that's quite significant. But again, what is going to be important is going to be skills and investment, and I think that on both of those areas, I must say I am rather optimistic that Greece is going to make it and make it very well this time round.
Well, from the viewpoint of an economist observing the situation, it looks like the conditions are there for growth in the next few years. But let us see what the policymakers and the business people are going to do. So let's. I would like to thank Minister Georgiadis, Giulia Brenna, you, Chris, and Mr. Stassinopoulos, and of course Hellenic Production for co-organizing this discussion. I guess it was very interesting. And useful, perhaps even more than interesting, to hear the priorities and the views of the European Commission at the start of this new growth era. There are lots of uncertainties, and we will be here to analyze them as they evolve. The video of this event will be there for future reference. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you very much, Nikos and Chris.
Thank you.